If events like the flood and the Tower of Babel are true, and if the Bible can be trusted, then the people who lived around 2500 BC would have also remembered the account of creation, wouldn't they? They would remember it because Adam was alive 1600 years before these events. And yes, we're talking about the very Adam who tasted the forbidden fruit offered by Eve. Back then, people lived for a very long time. Adam lived for 900 years and Methuselah for 969 years. Let's break this down a bit. When the flood came, Methuselah had just passed away. And Methuselah was alive at the same time as Adam. In fact, there were only 8 generations between the creation and the flood. So if these events were true, it's highly likely that people would have remembered them. Their writing system, rich in historical layers, makes it entirely plausible that such monumental occurrences would be embedded within their ancient characters. If these events truly happened, if the Chinese people are descendants of the Tower of Babel and ultimately the lineage of Noah, it stands to reason they would have recorded these global cataclysmic events. Next, we'll explore how all these global events were meticulously documented in Chinese history. Let's begin with Genesis. It says in Genesis 1:26, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image.'" The word make can also be interpreted as to create. In this image, we see a Chinese character that means to create. This character is particularly significant when we examine its components. It is composed of symbols that mean speak, dust or mud, life, and walk. This connection is astonishing because in the Bible's creation story, God created man by speaking life into existence and forming man from dust, breathing the breath of life into him. Now let's journey into the story of the Garden of Eden. Ancient Chinese characters hold remarkable insights, and as we examine them, we may be astonished by just how much detail about the garden has been intricately preserved within their strokes. Let's uncover these hidden connections together. In the Chinese language, there are 2 distinct words for garden, each reflecting unique aspects of the Garden of Eden. The first is Tian. This simple yet profound image illustrates a river dividing into 4 river heads, highlighted by the blue lines in the picture, as described by Moses in Genesis 2:10-14. This detail corresponds to the rivers of Eden mentioned in the Bible. The second word for garden in Chinese is yuan, and it holds astonishing detail. Consider the biblical account in Genesis 2:7, where God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. In Genesis 2:8, we learn that God placed the man he created into the garden, described as an enclosure. Later in Genesis 2:21-22, God takes a rib from the man's side and creates a woman. Remarkably, all of these details are embedded within the image of yuan. In the lower portion of the symbol yuan, we see 2 people, one emerging from the side of the other. This visually represents the creation of woman from man's rib. Thus, the key elements of Adam and Eve's creation and their life in the Garden of Eden are encoded in this single Chinese character for garden. If the ancient Chinese word for garden so clearly captures the essence of Eden, what about the word for happiness? Could it also reveal a connection to Adam's perfect life in the Garden of Eden? Let's take a closer look at the character. Fu. Happiness in the beginning. Adam experienced true happiness in the perfect garden God created for him. He had a loving wife to share his life with, abundant food from the trees, and meaningful work in tending the garden. Yet the greatest source of his happiness was his close, unbroken relationship with God. The ancient Chinese character for Fu, meaning happiness, which also translates as blessed, beautifully represents this harmony. It depicts God and one man together in the garden, reflecting the pure connection Adam shared with his Creator. At this point, sin had not yet entered the world, and their fellowship was perfect. Next, we examine the word jin, which translates to forbidden. The book of Genesis recounts, "The Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day you eat of it you shall surely die." Genesis 2:16-17. The Chinese word jin, meaning forbidden, carries a fascinating connection. It represents a command related to the forest of trees in the garden. The Bible describes two significant trees in the Garden of Eden. Another tree was the tree of life, freely accessible to Adam and Eve. But the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was strictly off limits, as God had explicitly instructed them not to eat from it. Breaking God's command would mean death. But what does the ancient Chinese word zhu, meaning execute or put to death, reveal? Let's take a closer look. The etymology of this word powerfully reflects God's warning. His words made it clear, if they ate from the forbidden tree, their life would end, and they would return to the dust from which they had been created. After Adam and Eve disobeyed and ate the fruit of the tree, the Lord pronounced, "In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return." Genesis 3:19. The Bible tells us in Genesis 3:1, "Now the serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild animals the Lord God had made. So the devil came to tempt the woman." But what is the word for tempter in Chinese? The one who gives temptation. It is the word mu. How do we write a word mu? There was a garden, and then there was a movement. One guy came to man secretly. So this word kui means devil. It also means suspicious. He came among the trees hidden under cover. When you put all this together, you get the Chinese word for tempter, which vividly illustrates how the devil came into the garden. The Bible also tells us how Eve lusted after the fruit and became greedy for it. The word for lust or greed in Chinese is tan lan or lan, which is written as trees over a woman. There are plenty more examples from the events in the Garden of Eden, but in the next episode, we will jump directly to the events surrounding the flood. Between Eden and the flood, significant events take place, including the story of Cain and Abel and much more. Remarkably, Chinese words reveal insights about these events long before the Bible was written. Stay tuned. It only gets better as we approach the conclusion.